make their money and then.
Oh, I can picture eating one now, pulling it all the
Oh
way
man,
out.
they have an infinite shelf life at my house because I'm not touching those things.
I think they make them Mike and Ike, and they make other candies too, not just.
We worked for Coke Industries one time, did a job for them, and we did a job for Mars, the Mars company, which is the Mars Brothers,
Mhm.
which both have a reputation of being incredibly secretive, where it's a family-owned business and, very, and they were just horrible to work with. Our consultants universally hated working for partnerships because, and especially law firms, because somewhere you knew in the 6 months of working with them, you were gonna hear, not with my money, you won't. I mean, it was, there's
They had the chairs, right?
Yeah, you can.
but the industries we got to work for, all over the US. I didn't get, unfortunately, the higher up in the organization I got, the less I got to get out in the field. But we had a team working on one of the oil rigs up on the North Sea one time. It's just kind of neat to work on the lower end. We had, we
So
did a
you
lot.
went there?
No, I didn't.
Yeah,
No,
I've seen what you said.
I had, I did get to go to Alaska one time. We had a team that went up and did some work for ARCO in Alaska. And I got to go to Anchorage, but we actually had a team that went up on the North Slope, which is funny because it's like a 2-hour jet ride out of Anchorage. And it's an intrastate jet ride.
Yeah.
But I had one consultant on it. She's, matter of fact, I'm still Facebook friends with her. But, she went up on the North Slope in the winter and wanted to go outside just to experience it. It was like 40 below that day. And they just laughed at her and said, we have the equipment, we can let you go because everybody wants to do it. And she took like 3 steps away from the door. And she says, it was just unreal. It was so cold, it was painful. And after 3 steps, came right back in, and they just all laughed. So everybody does the same thing. Nobody wants to be outside the same time.
Man.
I can barely deal with 40 above.
Oh.
I do that every winter, or if I'm visiting my, whether it's Colorado or friend, my relatives up in Adirondacks, whatever. Whenever it's really cold, really, I just, like it says, it's gonna be 7 in the morning, 2 below or something. I wanna get up, do that just to go outside, just to.
Well, I grew up in Ohio, and Ohio would always have, almost every winter, we would have a week that it would drop below 0 and stay there for a week. And that was the week that everybody's cars, if there's any weakness in infrastructure. So if you have a car that's low on radius, that's the week that it freezes. If you have a pipe that's got the draft in the house, that's what it freezes. It's just that week. And and Ohio is such a great state. In the wintertime, that gray overcast. But you grew up in North State.
Northwest PA.
Yeah, so you would have seen some of that lake.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Fewest number of days with sun in the U.S. except for like
Oh, really?
Seattle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Just one of the people up in Alaska that you're not a hunter or a fisherman. There's nothing to do, and the suicide rate and divorce rate in Alaska is horrible. It's people just
Yeah.
6 months of darkness. So all there is to drink and fool around. And that's what people do. The divorce rate and the suicide rate reflects that.
I had a hard time getting myself
Oh,
this morning.
okay. That's okay.
Yeah, our animals, that's the first time in a couple of weeks that that's a.
Oh, I had a cat walking all over me, and I just said, go to sleep. It was still dark out.
I know, yeah. I always try to change the clocks back, like early evening,
Yeah.
like 7 or 8.
But mentally prepare yourself.
Yeah, well, I change the clock back so that I don't stay up late and that, that I'm so, it's 9:30, but it's really 10:30, given what you're doing with your sleep-wise, but that's a crazy time. No, we just been talking, I figured it'd be, all righty, well, we are us, and, let's begin. Lord, we thank you for this day. Lord, again, as we've been saying, weather, just don't know what we're gonna find. People out with shorts and short sleeve shirts on skateboards, last week or whenever it was, in a 74-degree day. And this storm. On the one way, we can say, we know the spring's coming. But with the larger sense, we know the atonement, restoration of all things. But here we are this day, where we pray to God this time. Strengthen us by your presence and by your Holy Spirit speaking to us in our hearts and minds. In Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. So what we're gonna do, it's always hard when when the weather's bad and some people can't make it, and so, but I'm gonna go ahead and go on, with what I figured out and let's do today. It'll just mean maybe next week I'll have to do a little catch up in the beginning, for those who come, so unfortunately you'll have to hear that again. But I did think that I would also take a moment today to go over not go over, but since everyone who's here now was here last week, there was a young couple that was going to come, David and Melissa. But I know he has a car, he says, doesn't do well in the Mustang, doesn't do well in he's got a convertible Mustang. He said doesn't do well when the weather's not good. So this sheet that I had last week, the pressing on with Philippians 3. I just want to, and you can go to it if you have it or not, but I'm not going to go over those passages because we did that last week, but I just want to drop down to the bottom and, reiterate that again. Oh. Well, I wonder where that got. I thought this was the book that had my stuff in it, but I'll be okay. I don't want to do that today. So down the bottom there where it says growth strategy. So what is the end goal? And I think we went over this a little bit last week. I'm not sure. But in what Paul was saying there, I think it's sort of a simple answer. But what is the end goal? What is Paul's end goal? What does he say that is his end goal there? He's pressing on to what? You can read the verse again if you want there. Yeah. He says, just that phrase again where he says, I want to grab hold. I want to have, everything that Jesus, grabbed hold of before. Basically saying there was a purpose that Jesus had when he called me, and Paul, of course, he had that specific task of, going to the Gentiles and he told from the beginning, things he would suffer. He did suffer. Struggled a lot. But that end goal is I want to be like Christ. I want to be mature. I want to press on. I want to reach everything that I have. So as you can see there, I have in parentheses there. That's there. That's where I want to go. He's obviously, we said last week, he's looking for, there's two parts of it. He's looking to partake in the resurrection, to be there, to reach that end goal, but he's also talking about this life, because he said, I will change you. I'm pressing on, forget what's behind. And again, it's embracing kind of idea that he's pressing on, but not looking behind him to see who's behind him, who's near him, or what happened, but looking ahead. So that's the there. And so number 2, hey, come on. Have a seat.
Okay.
Carlos, we're just, this Philippians 3 sheet, we're just looking at it again for a quick kind of ready to step off from that. So number 2 was says in the growth studies of where I am now. You know, it just seems to me, you know, if you know, there's a lot of the gyms and Ys and stuff and, you know, offering for, maybe for a long time, but I only remember it being in these past years more so, where you can get a personal trainer, right? You go in there and, you know, if you talk with somebody, and I know a couple of people that have done that, they'll just say, well, what are you trying to do? What is, you know, well, I want to get healthier. You know, I want to lose some weight, you know. Or somebody may specifically say, I want to, I don't know, I want to, you know, my neighbor started playing pickleball and I want to play pickleball. So I want to get in shape for that, whatever it may be. That, and they'll write that down and that's the goal. But then they'll, you know, well, where are you at now? What are you doing now? Do you run? Do you do this? Do you that? What's your weight now? You know, what they're looking to do is get a sense of where am I? Where are you now? You know, which is the here, right? And then they're there. And then like the third question is, how do I get from here to there? And that's what I have intended, you know, since working with this material, for the spiritual fitness training to be about, and through this Lenten series now, the Lenten time period of examination, where am I? Where are we now? What's the here? And you know, what's the there? So two things is that I've tried to say that this is the there, this is part of it. We'll go over some more of it, but this is part of the there. You know, the there is to build into our lives these spiritual fitness goals and tasks, so that, you know, that we would, you know, personal covenant for fitness and maturity, that we would be mature. So then the question was, where are we now? So that was the spiritual fitness checkup. So did anybody get a chance to go over that? Okay. All right. And if you didn't, then I would encourage you to continue to do that. I actually have, if we get to it today, I actually have another evaluation sheet that has to do with this piece. And, you know, we'll see if we'll get to that today. But I don't have my sheet with me. I've done this a few times. And like I said, and I brought, where are they here? I brought extra copies and I'm going to hand them around and put this in your folder. And, you know, this will be for your follow-up, you know, 6 months from now, whatever. That's going to be my suggestion, is to, you know, if you have any type of day planner or whatever you want to call it, that you make a note for, I'd say at least January 1st, to make the beginning of the year time to do the checkup again. You could do it sooner, thank you, but then too soon and there's not time for really working on it. Because one of the things, and I'll say this ahead, one of the reasons for doing the checkup, and this, you know, I created this to use in churches, but also, which has mostly been used when I was with individual persons, you know, and one of the things we tried to do from this is, you know, and coordinated with this, because it's coordinated, was to say, you know, if you came up with an area that you had not very much or never, well, that might be an indication of, you know, something that you might want to do a special focus on. You know, this is very similar, I'll say, to, you know, when I've done pastoral counseling over the time, they trained us in seminary in this organization that's called Prepare Enrich. Did anybody ever hear of them? Well, Prepare Enrich, it's an organization that started in like the 80s, I guess, you know, to try to work with couples to prepare for marriage or to enrich the marriage that they have. So I have all materials around that. And one of the sheets that I used a lot over the years was, there were 12 things on a page: conflict resolution, egalitarian roles, you know, who's going to do what roles, communication, there were a number of different things on that list. And then there were, next to it said, strength or growth, and then a little line to check. So what I've had them do is, separate, not looking over somebody's shoulder. And I'd take a couple minutes, and they were to check off 3 areas in the strength areas where they, down that list, where they thought it was a strength area for them. And then 3 areas that they thought might be a growth area. And then I told them up front, none of us are perfect, so there's all growth areas, and I said, and I know it's hard to maybe pick 3, but there's a specific reason we're going to do that, and that was that we were going to then go over that. Then we went over it back and forth. What was your first strength? Did you have that as a strength? Did you have it as a growth area? And there'd be a lot of times when the one person said, well, I think communication's our strength. Strength area because this, and that. And I'll say, let's say Tom said that. I said, well, Janet, so did you have that as a strength area or growth area, or did you not have it? And she goes, I actually had it as a growth area. And Tom was like, really? This happened over and over again over like 25 years. Really? Why? And then she said, well, it's not like we don't communicate, but it could be a little better at it, and this and that. So, but it really became, it was a good exercise. And then what we did is, from that, we chose something that said be communication, or whatever, as an area to work on. And then the next session, maybe we talk about that. Maybe I find a book to work on. A couple can learn how to communicate, whatever it may be. And then I would offer to them, and a few of them took up on it, not too many, but I would offer up that a year from now or 2 years from now, from that date of the, so that was usually maybe 6 months or something before the wedding, and then I would tell them, a year or so after the wedding, I'd make a note my daytime of that. I would connect with them and see about if they wanted to get together and go over it. And like I said, there were a few that did, not a large percentage. And what we would do is I'd have them do the same sheet again. They wouldn't, they weren't supposed to look at their other sheet. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, I can't tell. But they were supposed to look at that sheet and do it again. And then I'd have the original, which would be like a year and a half back or so. And, maybe, and then I would, bring up those particular areas where there was either a disagreement or maybe they both agreed that communication was a growth area. And then we'd say, well, how's that going with this and that? And they'd say, well, we feel, they would do it, they feel it's doing well. And then I'd say, well, a year and a half ago, you both had that as a growth area. And now you're saying it's a strength, and it became a kind of, affirmation and for them to say, oh, yeah, I guess we have worked on that, So it's the same kind of thing, that our, to take that, our spiritualize that seriously, that we would do some type of system whereby we are going to, build into it a checkup, and that's what this is all about. So there's different ways to proceed with this, and like I said, I'm not going to go around the table and what did you have for number 1 and what did you have for number 2. But first, I'm going to ask: does anybody, brave soul, want to just talk about maybe just doing the doing in general? What did the process feel like? Anyone who got a chance to do it?
Yeah, I'll start. I was a little dismayed at how inward looking my responses were, and I don't, it'd be easy to blame it on COVID, but when it starts talking about some of the questions that were inward centric versus outward centric, it sure felt like my answers were more inward centric, things that you're praying for. Besides my family, there was much less thinking about the world and more thinking about things close to me. So that was disconcerting. Just in all. And of course, my mind wanders as maybe it's age. But as I did that, I'm reading the questions, responding, but then thinking about, well, why did I respond that way? The second impression I had is how lukewarm I was, of how easy it was just to respond right down the middle, as compared with, why isn't there more passion, or am I too self-centered that I'm not recognizing how weak I am in some of these areas? So those were kind of the two, without getting specific answers to specific questions, those were my impressions when I walked away with. Well, that was an interesting exercise and not what I expected. Just
Yeah. Anyone else? Let's see what microphone it is, make sure I got the time. Was it an easy process? So anyone else who did it? No? You're shaking your head, Lloyd. Any reason why, or?
Like Ken said, it makes you look inward, and I'm like, yes, I do. I thank God every day when I get up for what I have, and then I'm like, do I? Do I really, or am I praying for needs and not being more thankful?
Yeah. And that's, and really, thank you for honesty, and that's part of what the 4 is about. And I want to reiterate again that I have we talk about the growth process here. I mentioned this, a while back, I think, I'm not sure, but I believe that there's what's the right word? Well, we'll say progression. I believe there's a progression in the 4, the in, and the through. Meaning I believe that the more I'm aware of and conscious of and thankful of what God's done for me, the more that becomes, presented before my mind, then the more I'm moved somehow, the more I trust God, or the more I'm drawn to want to allow God to work in me. I just think there's a relationship between those two. And then the more then I'm desirous and wanting God to work in me, then I think it only stands the reason that, that leads to the more in which God can work through me, because now I'm being transformed, and now I'm being, walking more in the Spirit and in God's presence. And then, more so, as Paul said, we're his ambassadors. So God makes his appeal through us, that through us, that more that can happen. Okay, anybody else with the process itself? No? All right, so looking at this first section, even in the light of maybe what Laura, you just said, Lori, did you, was there any one in particular there, or maybe that one you just mentioned, where you scored, either lower or higher than you might have anticipated?
Well, there was a lot of things I scored lower on than I thought. And then I might have cheated a little and scored myself high on things that I thought I was really doing.
And again, this is hard, the analogy I always use is, I said, it's not like they, there's some meter like they created in Star Trek or something, that you can press a button and go, okay, you got 86% walking in the Spirit today, 45 to, there's nothing like that. So self-evaluations always leave something to be desired, but if they're done honestly, as honest as we can, they give us some kind of indication. So anyone in particular you wanted to share, or no? No, that's okay. And like I said, it doesn't have to be, but just in general, lower than, yeah. Ken, any from what your first section? Or
one stood out, which is
and you don't have to give your numbers.
question 8, which is I'm grateful for the lessons I learned from trials and times of failure. When I read that, I was reminded of a story that I heard a pastor tell one time of 2 men who gave a testimony in church. And one man stood up and talked about how God had saved him, that he had been an addict, a philanderer, lost his wife and children, and but God saved him. And he talked about how much he owed God. And the second man stood up and said, you know, I've been blessed that I was raised by two God-fearing parents, that God gave me a healthy body and a strong mind, and I've been reasonably successful at work and never really suffered from any of those. And then the pastor, in delivering this message, asked, which one has more to be grateful for? And your obvious response is, we're all impressed by the first one, and how God does that. But who's been more blessed? And so as I was reading this about, am I grateful? Well, I've lived a blessed life. I've got 3 good kids, a wife that I love, and we've been married for umpty years. And, you know, we're not being bombed.
Yeah, there you go.
I compare myself to my dad, who lost his father at 8, his mother at 12, who lived through the Great Depression,
Wow.
who served 6 months in a POW camp, who as long as he lived, suffered from PTSD. And I can see why people who have lived through that and found Christ and he's made an impact in their lives. But who's more greatly blessed when I haven't had those? And I'm really,
I don't see how you measure it. How do you measure it? You
well,
can't.
I don't know either, but certainly being thankful for I haven't had to go through those.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Take our blessings for granted.
Oh, we do. And so that's kind of where my mind was going to, wow, I just really need to not take them for granted.
You know, I don't have the passage right in mind. Maybe it'll come to somebody else's mind. But it's a passage where, I forget. But anyway, at the end, Jesus says this, one of his, you know, short little teachings that, you know, that grab hold of a great truth. You know, it was about, I think it was the woman who came in. But anyway, with his feet, when he said that, you know, and the Pharisee was like, if he knew who she was, she's a night walker, she's a woman of the street, But at the end of the thing, Jesus, then Jesus goes on and he says about somebody who, he says somebody was, forgiven a certain amount and somebody else was forgiven a certain amount, and who would be the one that would be most grateful, whatever. But the line that he says at the end, he says, for whoever is forgiven much loves much, and that doesn't translate to that exactly, but it is this sense of, if there's a room, maybe if there's more, like in the Depression time, there was so much they didn't have, but what little they had. My mom used to tell me, things they were grateful for when they got fruit once or something. It's like, we get fruit every day. You walk in the store and you get 30 different types of apples or something like that. But no, I hear you on that. Anyone else on that particular, number 8, stick out? Failure, right? To be thankful for, why would we be thankful for failure?
The lessons that we learn.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible. It would be impossible to learn lessons. But it's easy to say when somebody asks, how are you doing? Good, thank God. But there's a difference when you're not being good, and you have to say good.
Yes, bad, thank God. That's not as obvious.
Right. At the end of the day, evaluating what's happening during the day, that's when we can say we're grateful for the lesson that I learned. It hurts, it makes me cry, it's probably, but at the end, I thank God for this lesson. It was my fault. It was not my wife's, not my children, not the society, not the war in Ukraine. It's been my fault.
Yeah.
And that's a lesson that we need to learn, because since Adam, we are accustomed to other people. The woman you gave me,
That's right. Blaming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw a photograph on Facebook a few months back, and I actually saved it on my camera roll. It says, everything happens for a reason. Sometimes the reason is that you're stupid and make bad decisions.
Yeah, well, I'll say this, my sister, she always used to say, like, things would happen, and she had some issues, alcohol issues, drug issues, and, but things would happen to her, and she'd say, well, everything happens for a reason, and got like, almost as if to say like, well, God had that happen, and it, whatever. And I'd say, oh, I don't, we had this little theological talk. I said, I don't ascribe to what's called determinism or fatalism, or, there's different words in theology for it, which says that every single thing that we do is determined beforehand. So, there used to be a joke with that somebody who believed that fell down a flight of stairs, at the end of the stairs and got up and said, I'm glad that's over. Hope there's not another one of them on the list or something like that. But I told her, I said, I don't know how to decide it all, because Scripture does talk about our days are numbered and things like that. But I think there's some place in the middle there where I said, you had the accident because you drove through the red light. God didn't make you drive through the red light. It wasn't set up on that day necessarily in the annals of heaven that you just weren't paying attention. You were being stupid and you had an accident, and now, so it's a different thing to say, I said, we all know this. I said, it's a different thing to say, what happens from that? Does that, make you make a decision to get a driving course or I don't know what, that changes your life. So then the reason then wasn't that God made it happen, but that from what happened, God brought good, Joseph, kind of thing. But the other thing I was going to say is that somebody told me, I never had it happen, but somebody said in these past however many years, a lot of corporations and businesses, when they would interview somebody, built into the interview structure is the question, so tell me about the things you failed at. So tell me about the things you failed at, the interviewers have been trained, to listen, but trained to, to take note. If the person says, no, I don't think there's been anything. No, that's an indication of a couple things. A liar, or someone who what? Hasn't risked anything. Stayed within this little boundary here, because if I don't try that, I'm not going to fail at it, and the kind of job that they're wanting the person to get for is someone they want to have a little more, maybe a little more boldness. But the person who says, well, boy, how long do you have? But then, well, tell me one of those things. And then that person needs to be able to, to get good grades on the interview, needs to be able to say, well, what? I tried to start a little business when I was 18 and, took the money that I had from something and I wasn't smart and this happened and that happened. But, what's the indication? Was that they, so what did you learn from that? Well, I learned to be smart about the money. I learned to be careful who I brought as my partner. All the things that, that would help for them to indicate that this person, knows. So how about number, because it kind of fits in with them. How about number 4? I am thankful to God even when times are difficult and uncertain. It kind of goes with what we just said a minute ago. Can you think of any times or for you recently or otherwise? Or maybe an example of somebody that that showed that?
Well, for those of us retired living on our savings this last month or so, watching the market go down by 15 or 20% is certainly disconcerting. I live in anticipation, no, that's not saying it right. Having already went through a couple of rounds of prostate cancer every 6 months, and I go get my PSA test, there's that moment of anticipation before you see how the results are gonna come out. I read Dan Neiswanger's post yesterday where he's talking about a friend of his pays attention to scans. They put in terms of, the anticipation of the cancer scan every 6 months or a year. And so, yeah, there's certainly times of uncertainty that we face.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Hard to be thankful for it. If the question was, do you find yourself calling for God to give you courage, to give you peace? That's a very different answer than saying, I'm thankful for the results of the test I don't have yet. Or, I'm thankful he's there to depend on it.
Yeah, and that's why I worded it, not I am thankful to God for times of difficulty and uncertainty, but in or when times are difficult and uncertainty, can I still be, be thankful?
Back in May 1998, my daughter died. She was 15. I was serving as a pastor in Willow Chapel with a Hispanic group. And this question came to me, met several people, because we continue with our lives. I was preaching, I was teaching, and visiting people. And sometimes I say, well, thank God for my daughter. She lived 15 years and 3 months. And somebody asked me, look at me and say, honestly, are you thankful? What are you thankful for? I said, well, first of all, I know God is with us, regardless what's going on, what is happening. The second thing I'm thankful is that He's continued with us in the future. I don't know what the future is in store for me, but I know He will be with me. And thirdly, I'm thankful that she was a Christian girl. We are Christian, and we're going to see each other. And I think that's enough, more than enough to be thankful for. Even though, back to number 8, grateful for the lessons. First lesson that I learned about it was that I'm not perfect. I'm not strong enough. I'm not wise enough. I'm not smart. I need to remember every day that I need God more than that.
Amen. Amen. Has anybody ever heard of the book A Grief Observed? So it's a tough book. Very rewarding if you stay with it all the way through. But C.S. Lewis, was considered the, he got Christianity Today, other magazines made him the most influential Christian writer of the 20th century. When he wrote, all kinds, the Chronicles of Narnia, and he wrote the book, The Problem of Pain, and the Screwtape Letters, all over the place. He had a really great effect in England during World War II. He was radio reporter during the war to the country. So it was really, really, but he got married to a woman right near the end of his life. Basically, was to, let her, sort of a civil marriage, he called it, so that she could live in England and not be deported back to America. But he did kind of have feelings for her and eventually fell in love with her. She got cancer and she died. And his life just fell apart, and he wrote about it in A Grief Observed. And you're reading this and you're thinking, this is the same C.S. Lewis that wrote Mere Christianity and all this other stuff. And it started out, it was just his journals, that he wrote. He wasn't going to put them out there to the world. And when he did put it out there in the beginning, he put it out there under a pseudonym, So in fact, he said while he was grieving for his wife over the next couple of years, there were people who came to him and saw the heaviness and suggested that he read this book called A Grief Observed, which he'd written under another name. But in that book, he talks in the beginnings because his faith just really struggled. And he said, was my faith just, this is the image, that powerful image he uses it in there. It says, was my faith just a house of cards that you know, when the time came when a strong wind blew on it, that it just collapsed. You know, and he was asking that kind of question. He was asking himself, you know, do I have, you know, what was my faith, you know? And was it only because things were basically good? That when I hit this tragic thing, now, and you know, because he really questioned God, but then through the rest of the book, he begins to talk about, you know, what he learned from it. It's a powerful piece. But I remember reading it saying, wow, you know, he's putting this out there.
Right.
I'm intrigued though by, let's see how I can say this. So I know people who have lost loved ones and are not a believer, and will point to that as how then can you believe? And so, but reality, the nature of the world, the creation, is that there is death, there is pain, there is evil, and God giving us free will, again, I'm not determined to side it, God giving us free will is that we then have to make a decision. We're going to experience all of that, or we're going to experience all that with God. And I choose that second, because without him, then the rest is simply meaningless. And so without that hope, without that certainty that there will be a tomorrow, that you will see your daughter, that I will see those that have gone before. In my personal journal, I've written some notes about the questions that I have saved up for my dad that I wish I had asked him when I was growing up. And I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but I had this list of questions. I wanted to sit and just sit down and say, so tell me about that I never really engaged with him. And so there's hope, there's positive, nothing I've deserved, but living without that, wow, that's just bleak.
Yes. Carlos, you said something?
Besides strength and peace and faith, why not? Faith in God. God gave us given us the opportunity to help other people. They're going through very, very hard struggles in their lives. And sometimes we have to explain, well, I know what you feel. I can empathize with your pain or your struggle because we went through this. And then people look at me and say, oh, okay, I know what you mean. That time, my fellow pastors tried to help us, and it was impossible. My family, my relatives tried to help me, my friends, but it was a group, not related with any church or any religion or any spiritual. It was a group of people who had lost their children.
Yes.
Help us to go through. God used them, and I was a pastor. I remember his name. It's been 24 years. He was the pastor of Glasgow Press. He was a very known pastor. He wrote books, and he went through the same situation with his 10-year-old son. So we sat, drank a coffee, and he talked to me, and with very, very simple words, he said, I know what you mean. I know what you are. I know God is going to use this. At that time, I didn't know how God was going to use, but He did. God had used it. He used our situation, our struggles, our pain, but also our leap of faith. I mean, now our transformation. And not that that I have learned, like I said, back number 8, I continue taking bad decisions sometimes. And one time I remember praying to God, saying, why, God, why? Why me? And I almost heard God saying, why not?
Why not? Yeah, why not? Yeah, yeah. Was I in are we, any of us in a category that shields us from the worst things? No. My story that to connect with that was, many of you know, maybe all of you know, but, my wife died 4.5 years ago, in August, but she died on a plane. We were flying out to Denver to see our son in his new home, and daughter-in-law that they had moved there. And she was I was in coach and she was in first class or Southwest or whatever it was, their version of first class. So we just got her so she could, stretch her legs out a little bit and be more comfortable. And the guy came back to me and said, your wife is, needs to go to the bathroom. Whispered, she needs your help with something. So, I took her to the bathroom back, but halfway back to the bathroom, she said, I don't feel well. And then she sat down in the chair right there and went, and that was it, So anyway, and then 40 minutes of them trying to revive her, and then they emergency shut down or landing at Omaha because we were too far from Denver, and then we got rushed to a hospital and they tried again, and then I'm out in the lobby waiting, and then sometime 3 or 4 days later, when I was at my son's, because I continued on to be with him, I just asked God, and it wasn't like a fish shaker. I'm not saying I'm above that, but at that point, that wasn't that. I just said, God, why, she'd always been ill since before we were married, lupus and other things. She lived longer than we expected, but I said, why pass in that dramatic way? Why, and I thought his answer was in so many words. He said, that it's often the traumatic situations that we go through that when we share that opens a window for others to share theirs, and in so many words, however he worded it was like that, I could go back in my journal and say what I thought he said exactly, but then since then, 4.5 years ago, it's been so. When I've shared that with people, they've said, oh, I don't know how you could go through something. How did you? That was a question because it was extreme enough. Lost your daughter, 15 years old. Most people, they don't know what to say after that, but what they say is, how did you do it? And my answer was, well, I did it. I did it. But, but God did, God got me through, and brought through. And so I think that there's a whole lot to that. There's a man named David Kessler. And if you've heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she's a woman who years ago put together what are called the stages of grief, the stages of death and dying. You've heard, that somebody's supposed to be, at first, there's depression or there's anger, and then there's denial first, anger, and then there's depression, and then there's moving toward acceptance eventually. Well, he worked with her on those and afterwards, Then he put out a book a few years ago called The Sixth Stage of Death and Dying. And he said, we need to add meaning. And we need to add finding meaning, of some sort. He had lost a 22-year-old son to drugs. And he said, and it doesn't come from a spiritual point of view that I can see, but he said that the only meaning that he could find, but it was helpful for him and his wife, was just this, that they had him for 22 years. It's a little bit of the better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all kind of thing. But he goes on to talk in that book about, that we can find meaning. It may not be right away though, but that if we keep, open to that. Alrighty, so I think we're at our time. So if you didn't get a chance to do it, I would ask you to do the checkup for next week, and we'll, I've got a lot of material in this course, but what I'm trying to do is just sort of let it flow from week to week. Because to me, what's more important is the the sharing and then getting the most we can out of what we got. So, we'll look over, any other questions from there, but then we'll go on to the in and through, and then, talk about the next evaluation. But, sounds good. Carlos, would you close us in prayer, please?
Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for this day, indeed a beautiful day. Thank you for your presence among us, Lord. Give us a day of rejoice, worshiping you as in our family, serving others, and knowing, Lord, that you are with us. Continue with us in the worship service in Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you all. Nobody's here during the week. I'm just going to leave here.